Welcome to LinkedIn Live with personal brand authority, Lida Citroen. Lida is an award-winning executive coach, speaker, and author working with clients in over 30 countries. She helps professionals, entrepreneurs, and business leaders manage the way they're perceived by the people who matter most. From leadership development, executive presence, to strategic communications and social media positioning, Lida's work is thoughtful, motivating, and practical. Get ready for a great program. Here's Lida.
Well, hello there. How are you all? I'm so excited to be back with you. We skipped last month, and if you've participated in my LinkedIn Lives before, you know that we do these every month. Now we're calling them Live with Lida. A little alliteration there for you. But we're streaming on Instagram, we're streaming on LinkedIn, and we're bringing you content that really drives home the value of what you want to do in your career, in your community, in your life. So today's topic is going to focus on impactful influence. And what I'd love to hear from you as I kick off the conversation is, who is someone in your life, or maybe somebody that you follow, who has influence with you? You can use their first name. If it's somebody maybe you work with or a family member, you could say mom or dad. You can name a famous person. But who is someone who you believe has influence with you? Go ahead and drop that in the chat, and I'll check those out in just a moment. But the reason we're having today's conversation actually comes from some work that I've been doing over the last few years on the topic of influence. And somebody asked me recently, Lida, you're known for personal branding. You've spent 20 plus years working in the personal branding space, writing all these books. Why is the shift now to influence? How does influence and personal branding, how do they work together? Do they intersect? Do they overlap? Is one a start and stop? How does that all work? So I thought I'd start off and tell you a little bit about how influence and personal branding work together. As I was writing this new book that I've got coming out, I started to think about the questions a lot of my clients have asked me over the past 16, 20 years. And what they ask is, they want to build a brand that helps them stand out, helps them command authority, attention, credibility. But really, it's not just to have the brand, it's to be able to use that brand. And how do they use that brand? They use it to drive influence. That influence might be in a meeting, it might be in a movement. I've worked with some clients who have worked in very significant ways to change the landscape of a community or a narrative. Political, sectors, social sectors, environmental sectors. And these are people who really feel in their gut that this is what they are meant to do. Thank you, Adrian. I see Adrian is dropping some comments in the chat. Thank you for that. Let me know, who is influencing you? Who are the people in your world or that you follow who are driving influence? And when I reflected on the conversation that I had with those clients, I realized that influence is an outgrowth of personal branding, right? So when we have this brand, we're seen on social media, we're seen on a website, we're seen in our company, we want that brand to drive influence. So it feels so natural to me to be talking about influence as a next step in talking about branding. Really, the goal is to have control, right? We want to control the narrative. Let's see if I can do this. There's the book, Control the Narrative. I'm never good at doing this. It's that reverse thing. Control the narrative. We want to drive the narrative and the story of who we are. We want to create and attract those options and opportunities that we specifically want. And we want to be intentional and manage the relationships that we have. So controlling the narrative, controlling our career is done through influence. So we're going to have a great conversation today about some power moves and some things you can start thinking about to drive influence, whether it's small or whether it's really large. But first, I want to go backwards a little bit because influence in the past has always been tied to executive presence. And in the new book that I have coming out in August, which trust me, you're going to hear a lot more about, I challenge the idea of executive presence the way we were all taught, right? Executive presence was this quality or this thing that was always depicted by a guy who looked like this. And we're going to pop up a picture, right? This is the guy that exuded executive presence as we were taught, right? He dressed a certain way. He had that charismatic smile. He walked into a room with gravitas and commanded attention and credibility for everything he said. Oh, and he wore a red power tie. The challenge with that in today's world, and I would say it started about 15 years ago, is that most of us don't look like him, right? We may not be that age. We may not be male. We may not be Caucasian. We may not dress in a suit. We may not be executives. And heaven sent, we don't wear a red power tie, right? So where does that leave the rest of us? Everyone else who might look like this, or look like me, or look like you, or want to do the kinds of things that you want to do. Executive presence, the way we were taught, gravitas, image, and communication really doesn't speak to us. So if that's the case, then how do we drive influence? If I want to lead my team to greater success, or I want more clout when I raise my hand and speak up on a project, or I want to drive organizational change in my company or my industry, how do I do that if I don't look and sound like that guy, right? In the red tie. Where's my place to drive influence? And that's really what I'm leaning into these days. And the reason I'm so passionate about influence ties to my own sense of purpose. And I'll tell you a quick story to illustrate this. Many years ago, I had spent the day with a client in their facility, having just some really deep conversations about their business and their strategy and where they were growing in their market sector. They were in technology, and the market was changing. Their clients were changing. We were trying to keep up with new demands and new trends. And so we had this day full of what I would call mental gymnastics, right? What if this? What if that? What could this look like? SWOT analysis. Every marketing, business, organizational tool I had in my toolkit was brought out. So by the end of the day, I was exhausted. My synapses had been synapsing all day long, and I was just tired. The client and I went out to dinner. We sat down. My lovely cocktail had just been placed in front of me. I was ready to relax into a nice conversation. And my client asked me a question. He said, "Why do you do the work you do? Why does this matter to you?" And without missing a beat in that moment, I think in the state of mind I was in, being so unfiltered, I said, "Because I want to be famous." And it was as if he enjoyed or relished in cracking some code in my psyche, because he went, aha, it is about attention. It is about ego. And I said, actually, it's not. The way I see fame, the way I see visibility, is that it gives me an opportunity to help more people, that I am willing to use myself to influence as many people with these tools and these messages and this empowering set of resources that I have access to. And that drives me. And if that means being on a big stage versus sitting in the back of the office, I'm willing to do that. So in a sense, my why for why I want to have influence comes from my sense of commitment to you, right? To know that I am here to serve you. I do these LinkedIn lives. I have hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel. I share content on Instagram and LinkedIn and all these platforms where there's no monetization, because it's not about ego. It's not about money. It's about a commitment I have that's unwavering and unapologetic, that influence for me is tied to service. So a thought for you is to think about, why do you want to have influence? It's okay to say, I want to have influence because I want to be taken seriously. I want my voice to be heard. I want to make a difference. I want to represent people who look like me who haven't been represented. I want to help other people go through something that I may have gone through that wasn't very pleasant. Whatever your why, that is the first step to understanding influence for yourself. The next thing I think that's important in understanding influence and how it will work for you is to challenge some of the assumptions. And the assumptions we were all taught, if you're anything like if you were raised like I was, right, with all the self-help books and the lectures and the seminars, influence doesn't come with a job title. It doesn't come with status. It doesn't come with rank. There are some very senior people in companies today. There are people leading communities that have the title, but they don't have influence. What they do is they drive compliance, they drive cooperation, but they're not driving collaboration. At the deepest meaning of the word followership, they're not driving influence. So they're not really leading. So if that's your worry, if your worry is I'm not in a position yet to have influence, I'm not senior enough in my company, or I don't have enough to say, or why would anybody listen to me? I'm a new hire to the company, right? That's an assumption we're making. And in my research, there are some of the most influential people I've come across who do not have the title. But boy, when they speak, when they offer an idea, when they talk about their passion and their vision, people pay attention. And that's influence. I'm going to take a quick sip here. The second assumption about influence is you don't have to look or sound a certain way. We talked about that a moment ago, right? The red power tie, the middle-aged executive look, right? That so many of us aspired to and tried to make ourselves fit into. It doesn't work for most of us. We want to feel like ourselves. We want to wear bright pink if we want to wear pink. We don't want to have to wear our hair a certain way or conform to a certain narrative. We see this a lot with younger generations, and I applaud them for feeling such a commitment to a sense of self that they're sort of butting up against those executive norms that we had in the past. They're showing us their tattoos and their piercings and their self-expression in ways that really identifies an opportunity for those of us who might be a little older, who want to still feel our sense of identity and our sense of personality in how we express ourselves. So conformity does not equal influence. That's the next rule. But the third rule, and this is maybe the most important one to think about when we think about assumptions, is it doesn't have to be someone else. If there's an idea, if there's a thought and it's well thought through, if there's a vision that you have for how things could look differently, or how maybe your team or your organization or your community or a cause that you're passionate about could be shaped slightly differently, then it is about you. It is about you stepping forward, stepping into the spotlight, being visible, being credible, being courageous, and taking that opportunity to have influence. We need you to have influence. I need you to have influence. We can't keep hearing from the same voices. So one of the biggest power moves I can give you for having influence, whatever that looks like for you, is to start. Just do it. You're going to learn so much along the way, especially if you approach influence with a growth mindset. If you think about listening to be curious, not to judge, if you're paying attention to the other voices in the room and saying, wait a minute, we're missing some voices here, and bringing those other voices in, that's how people lead with influence. It's not about waiting until you get to a certain position in your company. It's not about waiting until you lose the 20 pounds or you get your hair colored or you feel like you fit the model of what it should look like. Influence can come from 15-year-old Greta Thunberg, who sits in front of Swedish parliament and says, "This is unacceptable." Or it can come from someone at the end of their life who says, "I have lived this world and it's not working. We need people to do something about it." Wherever you are in the spectrum of your career, we need you. I need you to step up, and it will be scary, 100%. I have learned over the last year that vulnerability is not for the faint of heart. When I was writing this book, excuse me, I had to challenge myself to do what I've asked you to do for all these years, which is speak your truth, speak from your heart, and make yourself vulnerable. Ick. It's really not fun. We worry about being judged. We worry about, what other people are going to think about us. Yeah, and it's true, but it's critical to having influence, which is why influence is not about a job title. So let me give you some specific power moves. And if you have any questions, I will stay on a few minutes after and we can talk about those. But this is designed to be a much more impactful and more condensed LinkedIn Live with Lida session. So the first power move is to really understand your why. And I don't just mean the surface one, but why do you want to have influence? Why do you want to drive change? Why do you want to build authentic trust? Why do you want to make a difference? I would argue we should all want to make a difference, but it might not all be in the same way. Maybe you don't want to be on stage. Maybe you don't want to be famous. That's okay. How are you going to drive influence? Your why is rooted in your purpose. And if you've followed me for any length of time, you know one of my favorite quotes of all time is Mark Twain. There's two important days of your life: the day you're born and the day you realize why. Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here on earth in your community right now in this exact moment? Why are you here? Why are you designed to do what you're designed to do? If you want to have influence, you're going to need to be unapologetically brave and courageous in your commitment. It has to be unwavering because you're talking about including other people. You're talking about empowering other people to follow you. And you're going to have to serve in ways that maybe you haven't thought about before. So really spend the time and get clear on why. I know it sounds like self-help, woo-woo stuff, but it really starts the conversation, because if you jump to the what and the how and the where and the who, you've missed it. It starts with why. The second is, in order to really drive influence, you're going to have to get real. It's one of the rules that I introduce. And notice I'm not saying authentic. I'm using the word real. And I struggle with this because authenticity, it was voted one of the top words by Webster for the dictionary last year, right? Because all we're talking about is being authentic, being true to yourself, getting authenticity on the table. But most of us can't describe what that means. But if I say to you, be real with me. Let's get real here for a second. Most people understand what that means. It means let's put all of the corporate speak and the things we think we're supposed to say off to the side. Tell me what this really means for you. That's what it means to be real. So when I say always be real, that's how you have to be if you're going to have influence. It's not about airbrushing your photos and waiting until you look a certain way or sound a certain way and overly scripting your social media posts, overly crafting your website, or waiting until ChatGPT tells you how you should say something before you raise your hand and say, I have an idea, or something isn't sitting well with me. A real person takes that risk, and in doing so, endears themselves to us. The third has to do with service and inclusivity. It's important that when we are influential, when we have influence, we do it from a lens of service, right? Influence isn't designed to drive change that rewards you in financial gains only, right? There's nothing wrong with making money, but if that's the only motivation, that's not influence. That could be compliance or even coercion, right? You can coerce someone into following you, but they're not really being influenced by you. They're doing it for financial gain. But when you serve other people, you're doing it because in your heart, you know that's how the world gets better. That's how your community gets better. That's how your company or your team or this project gets better. It is a mindset. And inclusivity is also a mindset. It's not just a human resources initiative that where we check a box and say, okay, I've checked enough boxes, I get a gold star, now I'm inclusive. No, it's about saying whose voice needs to be part of this conversation. If I'm going to speak on behalf of you, am I the right person to speak on your behalf? Maybe I am, but then I'm going to do everything I can to learn about you, understand you, and make sure that your voice is part of what I share. So inclusivity and service are mindsets that literally drive influence. We cannot be influential without them. And the final one is to share your story. Tell us about you. Let it be a little bit vulnerable. It's okay. We're all scared to be vulnerable. It's not just you. I'm scared as well. I share stories that, yeah, probably I didn't want a lot of people to know, but the story is so important to sharing the message. And the message is unequivocal to me. So I have to share the story. It's okay. We're all doing this together. Your story is what makes you you. It paints a picture of a narrative. May not be my story, but your story is true and wonderful and should be celebrated for the learnings and the resilience and everything that makes you you. And that's really important. It humanizes you. And humanity is really missing in a lot of conversations today. So I guess the short answer to the question I was asked at the beginning, where do personal branding and influence come together? The way I see influence is it's a leveling up of your personal brand. You have a brand, you've done all the steps. Maybe you've read my books, you've followed my courses here on LinkedIn Learning, you've watched me on Instagram, you've looked at my YouTube channel, and hopefully you subscribe and follow. But you've done all the work and you've got this brand. The brand is designed to drive influence. So it is directly tied together. I do want to make sure that before we get to questions, that I remind you each month we're going to be doing these LinkedIn Live sessions, and we're going to be streaming live on Instagram as well, because we just love both of those platforms. And I encourage you to subscribe or follow me or check out my resources, because each month we're going to do a different topic. Some topics I'll be talking to you like today, and we'll keep those a little more condensed and focused and impactful. But sometimes I'm going to bring a guest with me. And these are all going to be people who have driven influence in all the ways we just talked about on a topic, in their community, in their industry, to drive change. Next month, I have a dear friend joining me, Adrian Miller. You may know him. He was a recovering lawyer who decided to pivot everything and become a soul food author. So he goes around the world now talking about soul food and teaching about diversity, teaching about inclusivity and all of these wonderful topics. But food is the catalyst. How fabulous is that? So join us next month for that. Be sure to follow me and be sure to get questions ready to drop in the chat, because I'd love to hear from you. Hopefully these power moves were helpful and you'll take them and start putting them into action. Definitely message me and let me know how they're working. I see that Marcy says vulnerability is good therapy. That's interesting, Marcy, because I think it is a form of therapy, but we have to be careful, right? Because there's also a way to be vulnerable that's TMI. And yes, y'all know who I'm talking about here, right? That person who says, I just want to be vulnerable for a moment. And then they tell us things that we don't want to hear, that make us uncomfortable, that change the dynamic because they shared something that went way beyond being vulnerable and it dove into being overly uber personal, right? But vulnerability is saying, yeah, this kind of scares me. And I'm okay because I know you're scared too, and we're going to do this together. Vulnerability is saying, that's a great question. I don't have the answer, but let me get back to you instead of trying to fake it or fudge your way through because you think you're supposed to have the answer to everything. I love to share the story of when I was on stage once talking about a topic that many of you know I'm passionate about, which is how to hire and onboard, retain military talent. And somebody asked me a question I literally didn't know the answer to. It was a human resources question, and I probably should have known the answer. But in that moment, nothing. And I thought for a second. I went through a bunch of different answers that might be relevant. And I said, I don't know the answer to that. I would love to get back to you. Make sure afterwards that you follow up and we can, connect information and I'll get you that answer. But let me ask the audience, does anybody here know the answer? And somebody did. And they shared that. But instead of faking it and fumbling through it, I owned it. This is a topic I'm supposed to know a lot about. I teach this all over the world, and I didn't. So it's okay. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, this initiative, this corporate organizational change has me unsettled. It's okay. It's knowing the time and the place and how far that vulnerability should go to get the influence that you seek. What are some of your questions? Let's hear from you before we get back to our busy days. What questions do you have about influence or branding and how you're driving the impact of your message within the organization? Let's see. Ooh, a lot of you have put in some great mentors or people that influence you. Oh, I love to see that a spouse is influencing you. My husband definitely influences me. He doesn't say a lot, but when he says something, it's like, wait, what? That was incredible. He might argue he doesn't have a chance to say a lot, but that's because he's married to a very talkative person. Let's see. Sabrina is asking, is building influence related to building a followership on social media? That is such a great question. Oh, I love that. How do you translate it every day into your workplace? A lot of us think about influence and influencers as social media, right? There's this whole new genre of a career, 6-7 figure careers, by the way, that drives social media, right? People who talk about products, talk about brands, they're brand ambassadors, they're promoting information to a very, very large followership. It's not the same thing that we're talking about here because some of us don't want that level of visibility, right? Maybe you just want to know that when you have a conversation with someone, they're going to take you seriously. When you raise your hand in a meeting and say, I have a different idea, or I see a different way we could accomplish that goal, that people are going to respect and consider your contribution. So, yes, you can build influence on social media. I look at people who are doing it in big ways, right? And those are the names that a lot of us hear about. But there are also people who are using their followership to drive their passion, whether it's their faith or their sense of representing underrepresented communities or it's social activism, whatever it is they're most passionate about, they're doing it using that platform, not for product or brand ambassadorship and money, but because they have a large followership and they're using it to advance that message. Ooh, another one from Marcy. Fabulous. Do you find those who influence are really good listeners? Now, let me see if I can dissect that question a little bit, because I wonder if the question has to do a little bit with extroverts versus introverts. and Marcy knows me, so she knows I'm an extrovert, probably with a capital E. Extroverts can typically get confused with people who have influence because extroverts can be loud and large and in charge and vibrant and charismatic and not shy, right? That's somehow the way we describe the term extrovert. It doesn't always mean we're good listeners. Whereas an introvert, someone who might be more reserved, will tend to sit back and consider and listen before offering an idea. So, in the research that I've done over the last few years, I think there are definitely extroverts who are using their platform to listen and pay attention and be observant to what the community that they're representing needs and wants and cares about. And they're using their confidence to be out front and be visible to influence important decisions or legislation or communities to be able to support what they feel passionate about. But I have equally seen people who are more reserved or would describe themselves as introverts have that same level of influence. They just project it differently. So I hope that answers the question. This has been such a fun conversation. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in. Otherwise, I encourage you to check me out on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on YouTube. My website is scrolling at the bottom. Thank you for that. And join us next month where we are going to be talking to a soul food author and speaker about how he really embraced his platform to talk about a topic he's deeply passionate about, which is diversity and ethnicity and how we all get along as humans. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And be sure to let me know how this conversation was. Message me online or drop a note in the chat even after we've closed. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.